Hello everyone, I'm Ian from Creative Visuals, and I have the Osmo Pocket here with me today. Basically what I'm going to be doing is just going through the different qualities and frame rates and showing you guys what kind of footage you can expect from this tiny camera. I'm going to be going through both 4K and 1080p, and I'm first going to put it on auto, and then I'm going to put it on to manual and show you guys what the different ISOs look like. We have a nice sunset here to test out the dynamic range with, so let's get right into it. Okay, so here we have 1080p at 24 frames per second in auto mode. So I'm going to go through everything in auto just for 1080p, and then in 4K I'm going to go into manual and show you the different ISOs. So this is the kind of footage you can expect, the amount of quality in 1080p at 24 frames per second. There we go. Okay, so now we are at 1080p at 30 frames per second. So still in auto, we're at 100 ISO, 1/1000th of a second for the shutter speed because I don't have ND filters yet. But this is the type of footage that you get in 1080p at 30 frames per second with the Osmo Pocket. Okay, so now we are in 1080p at 60 frames per second. So there you go, that's the type of dynamic range you can expect from it with the 1/2/3 inch sensor. So let's try out some slow motion next. Okay, so now we are in 4K at 24 frames per second, 100 ISO. This is just your automatic mode. I have it focused on the trees, or at least it should be. So I will switch it over here to manual in a second and show you guys the ISO. But first, there is an option to choose superfine when you're in 24 or 25 frames per second, and basically that's just going to boost up your bitrate. So I'm going to put that on now and show you guys the difference. I'm going to stay right here so I'm just going to change it and you guys can see the difference in quality. Okay, so now we are in 4K at 24 frames per second with superfine. So there should be an increase in bitrate, so it should have a cleaner image. You guys can be the judge. Still focused on the same spot. So next we're going to move up to 30 frames per second. Okay, so now we are at 4K at 30 frames per second, and we are back in fine mode because you can't do super fine in anything other than 24. And this is the type of footage we're getting. 4K 30 frames per second on the Osmo Pocket. Okay, and now last but not least, the big one here. We have 4K at 60 frames per second on the Osmo Pocket. So this is supposed to be at 100 megabits per second, which is nice. So still focused on the trees, or at least it should be, so you guys can tell for yourself. And you can see that you actually do get a bit of depth of field here if we focus on my hand, maybe. Please. Can't tell if it's focused. Try again. But as you can see with that f2 lens, you do get a tiny bit of depth of field if things are pretty close to the camera. So that is cool. But that is 4K at 60 frames per second. We can get some motion. We should get a clean image. We're at 100 ISO and 1/500th of a second. So now I'm going to switch it over to manual mode, go down to 24 frames per second, super fine, and just show you guys the ISO performance on this camera. Okay, so now we are at 4K at 25 frames per second with superfine. So we're going to start off just at 100 ISO, and I'm just going to slowly bring down the shutter speed and bring up the ISO to show you guys the amount of noise. So here we are, 100 ISO, 1/300th of a second shutter. Let's move it up to 200 and bring down the shutter a bit. So there we go. I'm just looking at my histogram here to make sure everything is good. So now let's bring it up to 400 and get that histogram all evened out. And that is looking good, just about there. So now we are at 4K 24 frames per second with 400 ISO. Let's crank it up to 800. And we're going all the way up to 1/2500th of a second. So here we are, 800 ISO. Bump it up to 1600. And at 1/5000th, we've leveled out our histogram. So There is 1600 ISO, and last but not least, as high as it goes, up to 3200, and we're gonna go all the way down to 1/8,000th of a second. This is not ideal at all. We need some ND filters, and you wouldn't want to shoot with this much noise. But here is what it looks like at 3200 ISO and a very not optimal shutter speed. But you guys should be able to see for yourself just what it looks like. We just don't have the best motion blur. So that is the type of footage. I'm going to put it back to how it would be ideally, back down to 100 ISO, and ideally we would be at 1/50th of a second, but since it's too bright, we're going to go up to 1/200th, and that should be good. So that is the different qualities, frame rates, and the noise performance on the Osmo Pocket. Doing a bit of face tracking. Let's see if it can go. Ooh, and it lost me. So you can't headbang with the Osmo Pocket if you are face tracking. And one thing that you do have to keep in mind is that this does not do the tracking at 4K 60, which is kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you're thinking about getting an Osmo Pocket, I hope this footage demonstration helped you out, just to see what it can do, how it performs with ISO, and how much noise there is. So once ND filters come out with this, the footage will be a lot more better motion blur wise. So we can all hope for that very soon. Take care everyone, have a great day, and stay creative. Bye.